that means I can't talk. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes, it's only the
Okay.
people who are attending that can't hear us, can't talk.
Oh, okay. I was about to just like keep chatting and chatting and chatting.
It's confusing.
Hello, y'all. Thank you all for attending. My name is Ten, and I'll be one of your facilitators, alongside Maddie.
Hello.
And sorry, I was just pulling up the introduction. So yeah, thank you guys for coming and joining today's town hall with honorary co-host Congressman Jim Sorry, I'm gonna butcher this last name. Someone want to help me out?
Langevin, sorry.
Langevin.
You got it.
We'll be here to discuss the impact of COVID-19, the impact COVID-19 has had on youth and young adults experiencing homelessness and housing instability. We are also joined by Myra from Foster Forward, Stephanie Nunez from Youth in Action, Tori Kern from Home to Hope, Brenda Clement from Housing Works RI, Christina Contreras from Fox and the Coalition for the Homeless. And you'll hear a little bit more about each of them as the panel goes on.
Do you want to introduce yourself, friend?
Oh, and I'm 10, and I'm currently part of PRISM's queer and trans work, as well as just a youth who has experienced homelessness and is on youth board stuff. I don't know all the fancy names.
What's your pronouns?
Oh, sorry, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
Okay. So my name is Maddie. Yeah, my name is Maddie. My pronouns are she and hers. And I am also a part of the queer trans justice program at PRISM. And I recently got hired, so I'm souped. But yeah. Should we wait for the congressman or?
This is Christina. I'm trying to figure out where he is.
Okay.
He is, but we can introduce the rest of the panelists.
Okay, so how we are going to do this, we are going to start with Myra, and then we're gonna go in order as y'all were named earlier, as 10 named you guys earlier. So we're gonna have Foster Forward, Youth in Action, Home to Hope, and then Housing Works. If you guys could just give us your name, pronouns, what organization you're from, a brief description of what kind of work you do, what are the needs that you see in the communities that you work in, regarding youth and young adults and how their access to good, safe housing. And if y'all could keep it to 3 minutes, just so that we can, fit everyone in. Yeah, we'll start with you, Myra.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Myra Mustafa, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. I'm a youth leader from Foster Forward and a young fellow from the Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, with whom I've had the pleasure to work with on a national level. One indicator that we focus on is preventing homelessness. I feel that there are many needs that must be addressed when it comes to youth aging out or who have already aged out of foster care. Coming from a place where there is little to no stability in our lives, we depend on our state to take care of us, as promised when we were removed from our homes. There have been policies that have been put into legislation in order to help youth during this phase in their lives, such as the Voluntary Extension of Care Act and the executive order put into place to extend aftercare services for those who turned 21 during the COVID-19 breakout. These are amazing, but we do need more. An issue that I see quite often is that there is a lack of focus on mental health. Youth who have been placed in state care often suffer from traumas that they are never taught how to deal with or even identify. It becomes hard to maintain a home when your mental health is not taken care of. Lacking a healthy mindset can lead to evictions, remaining in unsafe conditions, staying in unhealthy relationships, and so much more. Another issue that I find to be way too common is the affordability of an apartment. So the most affordable housing you will find are usually in neighborhoods that tend to be unsafe, and even then they tend to be overpriced. The high price of housing forces many youth to have to resort to having a roommate. And circling back to mental health, there are many youth that do not have the skills to live with others. Young adults may also be forced to live in homes where there simply is not enough space for all of the youth living there. We need more affordable housing, not only in safe areas, but also accessible areas. If basic needs are not met in a person's life, it becomes extremely difficult to focus on other things such as school, work, family, passions, and growth. This hinders a human from reaching their full potential, which is extremely important in creating a progressive society. The last issue that I want to mention are the high expectations that are set when moving into an apartment. The majority of landlords expect for all youth to pass a background check and a credit check. Coming from a place of adversity, this is not always possible. Policies that could be implemented may include more mental health services that directly focus on youth that are close to aging out and keeping them supported where necessary for however long needed. Another policy would be to make expectations for a youth living on their own plausible. Lastly, in order to avoid evictions that stem from lack of mental health and awareness, youth should be taught about tenant rights before even taking the steps to live on their own. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra.
Absolutely.
That was good, and I love all the receipts that you brought. Okay, can we now have Youth in Action introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Nunes. I'm the admin director at Youth in Action. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And at Youth in Action, we focus on working with youth on developing their voice and leadership skills. We also work in some places of advocacy. We are on a lot of our youth are on some boards across the state, working on advocating with youth and making sure that youth voice is heard and present in these different arenas. In terms of housing and access to housing, we do have youth who experience homelessness and who are unable to have a safe space to sleep at night. And during this pandemic, we've encountered a couple of our youth who are still in high school and having to do schoolwork without knowing like if they're going to be able to stay in the house that they're in that day. And so that's been something that's come up. While they're figuring out what they're doing, we're providing as much support as we can. We don't provide any type of like direct supports when it comes to housing instability, but we do try to provide as many resources and information as we can, and just provide that emotional support whenever possible. Working with youth and having my perspective of youth development, a big issue that I see in this area is the fact that these are youth. These are young people who are still trying to figure out life while also going through just changes physically, emotionally, just growing up, and then having to deal with housing instability and lack of access to food and just not feeling safe is just not good for their overall development. And so definitely take that perspective when focusing on youth, and we need to make a change so that they are able to have those experiences and be able to feel safe as they're growing up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. We stand Youth in Action. Y'all do the thing. Y'all show up to all the functions with the big speaker, and that feels good.
Yes.
I want to thank the congressman has gone on, so I want to give like a little introduction about him, and we can hop back into introducing the panelists. So thank you. Thank you, Thank you, Congressman Jim Langevin. Sorry, again, the last name is so difficult for me. Congressman Langevin, a Democrat, represents Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District. He's a senior member of the House Armed Service Committee and co-founded the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus. The congressman is also a co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth, which provides a forum of members. The congressman is also a co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth, which provides a forum for members of Congress to discuss and develop policy recommendations to strengthen the child welfare system and improve the overall well-being of youth and families. Wow, that was a mouthful. I only hope that one day I can get an introduction that girthy. But yeah, no, thank you for all your work and all the things that you do in representing our state.
Yes. So now if we could just jump right back into the panelists introducing themselves with Tori from Home to Hope.
Hi, my name is Tori Kern, and I work at the House of Hope as the Youth Outreach Coordinator. I use she, her pronouns, and the work that we do is supporting 13 to 24-year-olds with unstable housing in connecting to resources for affordable housing, basic needs, health, education, and employment through community outreach. The needs I see regarding young adults and their access to safe housing are that of the 101 young adults that we've worked with in the last 3 months, there are obvious disparities for LGBTQ youth, youth of color, pregnant and parenting youth, youth with mental health concerns and developmental disabilities, and youth with a history of domestic violence and sexual assault. And to address this, we don't need any one policy. What we need is a policy that requires all housing and basic needs aid to set aside a portion of funds for youth.
Can you guys see it?
Not yet. No, we can't see you yet, but we can hear you. Youth homelessness will continue to be prevalent if our solutions are not specifically tailored to the needs and realities of youth. Thank you very much.
But it says that he is not muted.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that, y'all. Lastly, could we have Housing Works please introduce yourself?
Okay, we're good now?
Good morning.
All right, thanks, Christina.
Congressman, I think you've joined the call. Oh, maybe not. Well, let me proceed while we try to get the congressman online. I'm Brenda Clement, I'm Director of Housing Works Rhode Island. I prefer she, her. And Housing Works is an organization that does research and advocacy around all things housing. Housing advocates like me say all the time that the path to economic opportunity begins at your front door. And as we've heard from many folks already on the call, making sure that you have that safe roof over your head is challenging in Rhode Island, even before COVID-19, and has become even more challenging as we face this public health crisis. But COVID has also reminded us that keeping that safe over your head is as even more important than ever, as some of the panelists have already talked about. I don't think it's any surprise to anybody on this call or participating today, but housing costs in the state of Rhode Island are very high. Our annual fact book shows that and demonstrates that on a regular basis. If there is no city or town in Rhode Island's 39 cities or towns where the state median renter income of $32,000 could comfortably afford to rent anywhere in the state. So the average renter was priced out of the market even before COVID, with the high job loss that we have seen, and the unemployment claims that we see skyrocketing in our state. We know that challenges keeping and paying rent and paying mortgages are going to continue to grow in our state, and that's why we've worked closely with our colleagues at the Coalition and Homes RI to put, and our congressional delegation, thankfully, to put at least temporary moratoriums in place around evictions and foreclosure. One of our national partners puts out a report on each year called Out of Reach. And in Rhode Island, in order to afford housing, you would need to be earning have an average of $20.86 per hour job. And as we know, many, many jobs do not pay anywhere near that wage in our state. So post-COVID, we're, as we said, are concerned about people being able to pay their rent and to stay in. And so working closely to make sure that we have legal assistance and other assistance for individuals who may be facing evictions or may be facing housing instability. We're working very closely to keep housing in the state budget, even though we have very, very tight and concerning budget numbers ahead of us. And
this is Christine, everyone. Hi, Brenda. I think you froze, but I do see Congressman Langevin. Welcome, welcome.
I do want to thank the Congressman for his huge. Yep. Okay, great. Well, I will stop right there. Thank you. Good morning, Congressman.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Excellent. Yeah, some technical difficulties getting in.
Yep.
I'm glad it finally came together. I've been getting very familiar now with multiple media platforms now, and from Zoom to Google Meets to a bunch of others. So it's I'm getting to know there's quite a few of these platforms out there. And
okay, Congressman, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, a couple or like all of us did. So just if you want to give us your name, preferred pronouns, your organization, and just a description of what work you're doing, and then you can begin your remarks.
Sounds good. Well, I'm Jim Langevin, the congressman from the 2nd Congressional District in Rhode Island. I've represented in the United States Congress now for 20 years. I'm in my 10th term, and I sit on both the House Armed Services Committee as well as the Homeland Security Committee. I chair also and member of a number of caucuses, including the Foster Youth Caucus, and I've been very proactive on foster youth and adoption related issues. Also very interested in career and technical education issues, where I co-chair the Career and Technical Education Caucus, and preparing our young people for a variety of in-demand jobs. I also specialize in cybersecurity, which has been a passion of mine now for more than a decade. So, but it's been the honor in my life to represent Rhode Island in the States Congress, and I'm honored to all of you today. There are many challenges that we're all facing because of COVID-19 and the shutdown of our economy, and having to shelter in place and social distance from friends, family, and neighbors, and the community at large. And I'm just hoping that we all get through this safely, and I know we are going to get through it, and we're going to get through it together. So I'll stop there, and then whatever you want me to begin my more substantive remarks, I can start whenever you like.
Yeah, I just wanted to know a little bit more about some of the work that you are doing around youth experiencing homelessness and like housing instability.
Sure. So let me launch into some of the comments that I had prepared along with my staff, and I'll give those remarks, and then any questions that I didn't cover in that, then we'll go into questions if you like. So obviously, the COVID-19 crisis has been challenging for all of us, but as with many disasters, it really hit the most vulnerable members of society the hardest, and highlighted some of the great disparities among us, especially on the economic income scale. One of those inequalities, of course, is housing security. So young people in particular are facing the highest rates of unemployment as a result of the pandemic, and many are struggling to pay rent right now. This is simply unacceptable, and I want you to know that I'm working with my colleagues to make sure that every Rhode Islander has the safe and stable home that they deserve. Fortunately, in March, Congress did pass the CARES Act, which provided some relief for the housing insecure. It instituted a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for federally backed mortgages and properties. It also provided more than $6 billion in emergency funding for housing assistance. And this was just a first step, though. Of course, Governor Raimondo has also put in place a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, and I applaud her work in that respect. Last week, the House of Representatives passed a $3 trillion stimulus bill. It's called the HEROES Act, and which contained major investments in housing supports, including $100 billion for emergency rental assistance and $11.5 billion in homeless assistance grants. The bill also included $75 billion to help homeowners with mortgage payments and utilities, and expanded the moratorium again on evictions and foreclosures to all renters and homeowners. So I was proud to drive down to Washington to represent Rhode Island and vote for that bill. I'm not flying right now because it's just it's too risky. So I've been driving back and forth to DC, and I needed to go down. But while the HEROES Act passage was an important accomplishment, the bill still needs to pass the Senate. I want to caution everyone on that it's not a done deal yet. We did pass it in the House, but we still have to get it passed to the Senate, and the president has to sign it. And Mitch McConnell has not been receptive to the bill that the House Democrats have sent over to the Senate. So, but I can tell you this: I assure you that negotiations are going to be tough, but these are investments in housing that are a top priority among other priorities for House Democrats, including me, and we're going to fight hard to see it passed. Just by way of example, I'm co-sponsoring legislation called the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stability Act to provide assistance to low-income renters so that they can avoid eviction. One of the areas that I'm particularly focused on is supporting transition age foster youth who are at high risk of homelessness, even when the economy is strong. I know that this population is found challenges with dealing with homelessness, so it's something I'm very attuned to. Recently, an organization called Foster Club conducted a survey of more than 600 current and former foster youth between the ages of 18 and 24, and found that nearly 1 in 4 had lost their housing or feared losing their housing in the near future as a result of this crisis. So to address this troubling trend and other issues facing foster youth, I introduced a bill to increase funding for programs that support older foster youth with housing, food, education, employment, and counseling. The bill number is HR 6766, and that would increase funding for the Chafee Independent Living Program and the Chafee Education and Training Voucher Program by $500 million, and double the funding for the Foster Youth Independence Program at the Department of Housing, which would provide an additional $20 million. So this bill would also lift the 30% cap on housing expenses for Chafee funds, so young people would have more security during this time. And then just to wrap up, and then we can take questions. I'm very proud to work with my fellow co-chairs of the Congressional Caucus for Foster Youth, both Democrats and Republicans, by the way. And I'm pushing hard to get this bill included in any future COVID response package. So the HEROES Act included an additional $68 million for the Chafee Education training voucher programs that I had referenced, which is a start, but not nearly enough to address the current crisis. So I absolutely believe, I believe it's absolutely vital that we support our young people who need it most during this pandemic and the recovery. And I know that many of you have questions, of course, and we have some wonderful panelists today. So I'm going to stop there and let me hear how I can support you further. Thank you. And by the way, I was before they allowed me into the I could finally get in and get logged on. I was listening to Ten Hall do the introduction, and thank you for the very nice intro. Well done. That was great.
Thank you so much. I was trying to set up my computer at the same time. So I'm like trying to read your email bio, and it's in a really tiny corner in like the corner of my screen. And I was like looking at certain words and then trying to go off the top of my head. But thank you so much for your time.
It's very natural, and like you had done it a million times before. So great job.
Maddie, do you want to bring us into the question and answer part of this?
Yes, guys, yes. Okay, so now we are going to be moving into the question answer part of this webinar. And I just want to first say that me and Ten will be revolving out of the panelist role, or like we will be switching from facilitators to panelists for some questions, just because we both have done some work around this and would like to give y'all our input as well. With that being said, we will be prioritizing the voices of the youth and young adults on this webinar. So, for example, Ten, myself, and Myra just will be looked to answer the questions first and give their input first. Because for me personally, I know that when you're doing stuff like this with adults, it is very hard to like try and assert your point being someone who's younger. So we're just gonna keep that very transparent from the beginning. So don't get mad, oldies, if I cut you off. I'm just playing. But yeah. So yeah, let's jump into the first question.
Sorry to cut you off, Maddie. For folks who are tuning in, feel free to submit questions. You guys can put questions in the chat box and they'll be added on to our list to ask the panelist or the congressman if you have a question. Make sure you specify to who on the panel if you want the specific person to answer. Otherwise, any of us will hop in. Thank you.
All right, y'all. So first question, what do you wish people knew about young Rhode Islanders experiencing housing instability, especially if they're on their own? I'm gonna look to Myra to answer this one first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. So first of all, I just want to point out that housing instability for anyone is extremely tough. But when a young adult or youth is on their own, it's even harder on them. Youth, young adults, they're making their way into their world. They're just finding themselves, or at least trying to find themselves. And I feel like stability is one of those basic necessities needed in order to find yourself and really just become who you're meant to become in this life. So I kind of want people to know that just because someone turns 18, it does not mean that they're ready to face this world on their own. Being on your own at such a young age is beyond scary, and facing housing instability will teach you how to survive, but it will not teach you how to live or make a living for yourself. And honestly, I just feel like no young person should go through this alone. So I feel like there definitely should be more support in helping. I know there is a good amount of support, but I feel like there needs to be more support in helping a youth make this transition easier on them.
Thank you. Ten, did you want to answer that?
I don't have much to add on to that. Thank you for asking though.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else on the
All right.
panel?
Any of the other, yeah. Any other panelists want to give that question a shot? What do you wish people knew about young Rhode Islanders experiencing housing instability, especially on their own?
I'm happy to respond. I wish that people knew that getting a job or your healthcare settled or furthering your education without the basic need of housing is an unrealistic expectation of any person. And so we really need to make sure that we're shifting the conversation away from these are the steps that the individual has to take in order to secure their housing, to our community has a responsibility to provide housing to young folks so that they can get the job training they need, the education they need, the health care they need, that will hopefully enable them to use their innate resources and skills and strengths to provide their own housing one day, but at least in the beginning, for much longer than we think, there needs to be much more subsidized housing. It's nearly impossible for someone to go to college while paying for college and their rent. So just thinking about all the things that you have to do to unpaid while you're trying to get started in life, those things usually come from family supports, and our community owes that to folks who don't just happen to have those supports already in their financial social system.
Those are great points, and let me say this. You know, I wish people realize the potential of young people and the challenge of young people experiencing housing instability. I know from firsthand experience that young people are capable of overcoming extreme adversity to achieve their goals. They just need support and encouragement in a lot of ways to live up to that potential. And young people experiencing housing instability often don't have the same networks that other people rely on. So it's essential that we all provide assistance and support wherever needed. I want everyone to know that my staff and I are there at the ready to serve as a resource. You're not in this alone. There are resources that hopefully we can connect you with, but please don't ever think that you can't reach out, because there are people out there to help, and certainly my office and I stand ready to assist in any way that we can.
Oh, thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to answer that question? I just had a thought that I wanted to add before we move on to the next question. Okay, just something that popped into my head was, I would like folks to know that there is not a textbook definition, or like there's not a picture of what homelessness looks like. So I feel like in my personal experience, I was very insecure about being homeless. So I did everything in my power to make it not look like I was homeless, you know? I would try and overcompensate in my clothing and try and, you know, make it not look like I was struggling. And sometimes I feel like because of that, some folks didn't value my experience, because, oh, you don't look homeless, you know? Oh, you don't look like someone who doesn't have somewhere to sleep tonight. But that's like, you know what I mean? There's no like right way to look homeless. I found myself having to validate my homelessness in some situations, which was really uncomfortable. But yeah, that was just a thought I wanted to add.
Thanks,
And
Maddie.
it comes to, sorry, I was just gonna add a little real quick onto what
Yeah,
Maddie
go.
was saying about like filling like the homeless role is like a lot of times a lot of the work that that folks who are providing like support to homeless folks, they go to like you know, like the shelters, which is really like which is real, that's where you're gonna find a lot of homeless folks, but like there there are plenty of like homeless folks amongst or like folks who are like couch surfing or like among like other crowds, if you could say, like around other networks, not just in places where there are already like homeless populations. It's like asking people if they know, you know, are you like serving as like, are you letting people stay on your couch? And if so, like, do those people who you're like letting stay on your couch, are they connected to like resources? I think like that's important to think about when thinking about like connecting to folks who are actually in need of service.
Yeah, for a while, I've kind of lost my train of thought, but yes, Ken, I agree with you. All right, I think we're all set to move to the next question, unless anyone else has any more thoughts. All right.
Great. And because both Ten and Maddie would like to both answer the next question, I get to ask it. So the question that was sent was, what are the biggest barriers for youth and young adults in finding safe and stable housing? Again, if Myra and Maddie and Ten can start, and then other panelists, if you have other things you want to add, can join in.
So I wanted to start by just saying, like, we know some of the barriers, you know, like obviously access to information is definitely a barrier. Like Ten said, like Ten was explaining, those folks who may be experiencing homelessness, but like in a gray area, they may not, you know what they have access to. I also think another barrier is, oh wow. I think another barrier is, you'll have to come back to me, guys. I'm sorry.
All right, I can hop in. I think that alongside of like lack of access to resources and lack of like connection to these like communities doing, you know, the work is like a high specifically in youth and young adults, there is a high like criminalization, like I feel like there's high criminalization. So when there's like, you know, if you can get arrested for things as simple as like who you're hanging out with, and that gets put on your record, now like it's gonna be harder for you to get a job. It's gonna be harder for you to sustain yourself. But not only is criminal like the criminalization of young people in general affecting like affecting their housing and their stability, but like the criminalization of their families, because then again you're taking away breadwinners and people who could, you know, provide that extra support in the household. And we've seen that folks, you know, it's folks that have two parent households with that are making a good income, you know, there's probably lower like homelessness, as well as like access to like alternatives. So like alternative education, you know, once you drop out of high school, if you drop out of high school, now, you know, it's going to be harder for you to find a job. It's going to be harder for you to be connected to resources, but it's also really hard to find these alternative programs that can help get you back on track. So like, yeah.
Could I just add on to that too? I think from everything that we've heard directly from young people in particularly in even the foster care system, or young people in general who don't have the support system around, is probably one of the biggest challenges. They lack the adequate support system to help them navigate through their housing options and access assistance that may be already available. So this is particularly true for older foster youth. The same foster club survey that I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, found that nearly 2/3 of older foster youth don't have family members that they can rely on for help during things like a public health crisis, let alone just in normal circumstances, and that 20% were entirely, they said, on their own. So this is not just a challenge for foster youth, of course, and we need to make sure that young struggling adults are able to find housing and are able to access assistance already that's in place for them. Sometimes it's just about letting people know where those resources are and connecting them to them.
Okay, really quick before we pass it to Myra, I just wanted to finish my point earlier. One barrier that I believe exists, like I just have experienced it personally, the just like not meeting certain requirements to get certain help. So for example, like I applied to this program to try and get a house, and for a long time there was one requirement that I didn't meet, and if like it wasn't for that one requirement, then I might have had a house years ago, you know, and I might not have had all of the homelessness struggles that I had. Not only that, I also feel like the concept of aging out, like when does someone become not a young adult anymore, and when do they not have access to these services anymore? I feel like I know some places that, oh, you don't have access to these services after you turn 18, or you don't have access to these services until after you turn 23. And I'm like, well, what if I'm still struggling after I turn 18? Or what if I'm still struggling after I turn 23? Age is definitely a barrier. Whether you're too young to receive certain help, or I am 24 and I just turned 24 and now I'm considered too old to get this help. So yeah, that was just a point that I wanted to make before we throw it to Myra.
Yeah, so actually you guys pretty much covered what I kind of wanted to say. Like, I just feel like ageism is a big thing in it. Landlords tend to see young adults or youth in general as irresponsible. So that can make it hard to get an apartment or find an apartment. And then, of course, the high expectations that are set when getting into an apartment, such as passing a background or credit check. Yeah, pretty much. You guys covered everything.
Yeah, that's a
one more
point
thought
on
that I
the
had
aging out.
was, Congressman, I just had one more thought. So I feel like I'm speaking a lot from experience, but my first experience with an apartment, I was 18 and, you know, had nowhere to go. And I signed on to this apartment because it was a place for me to live. And me and my friends thought that we could do it. And there were errors on both parts, but I feel like the landlord definitely realized that we were youth who have no experience in apartments and landlords and everything. And just like youth being taken advantage of because they're, because they don't have all the information, or because they're not familiar with like finding apartments and stuff. That's it. So yeah.
I was just going to add, I hear the concern about aging out, and when there's resources there, when you're younger, if you're associated with state care in some way, that aging out of the system is a big problem, and you don't have the resources and even that support system around you. That's one of the reasons in that bill that I talked about, that I introduced, HR 766. Again, it's a bipartisan bill. Not only would increase funding for Chafee programs, but it would raise the maximum age of eligibility for Chafee supports to age 26. So that would help to alleviate some of the pressure. I'm hoping that we can get momentum behind that bill and get that support. I know that that Governor Raimondo has also put in a provision that prevents young people in state care from aging out right now during this COVID crisis, but but it definitely underscores the need for that kind of support to continue.
All right, if no one else has any more responses, we just have one more question while we have the congressman here. Just one specific question that we would like his input on. If no one else has anything else to add to this question. All righty, that sounds good to me. Okay, so okay. All right, so there's a question that is specific for you, Congressman. So I'm just gonna run through that real quick. You mentioned RI's eviction moratorium, the halt on evictions while courts are closed, but evictions are set to resume in our state on June 2nd, which is 12 days. How do you expect to protect young tenants facing financial struggles, many of which precede this crisis, who may be facing eviction in less than 2 weeks from today?
Yeah, and I would hope that the court system are going to be act as mediators and will be tolerant and supportive of trying to come up with a solution that doesn't result in eviction. This is an unprecedented crisis that we're dealing with right now, and I think we all need to have compassion and patience as we work through this time right now. So I can't guarantee what the outcome will be, but I think that the judges right now are going to show a lot of restraint and patience, and hopefully can work out some type of a plan that will allow for some forbearance being given. And by the way, that goes, you know, the courts also need to work with the landlord's bank or financial institution, because there's obviously that landlord would have a mortgage that needs to be paid, and so even lenders right now have been required to or encouraged to give forbearance for a certain period of time, and that should hopefully take off some of the pressure, so that landlords don't feel the need to right away go to eviction, that they can work out some type of a plan to give some room on the rent, even though it may have to be made up over time, because on the other end, the landlord is getting some relief from their financial institution, where they can put the mortgage payment that's due toward the end of the mortgage, as opposed to just skipping a month and then have to make it up the second month, or make it up right away. From what I understand, where the landlords, the mortgage holders are given up to 5 or 6 months of forbearance, so that they can put some of those payments toward the end of the mortgage, and that should take pressure off of them, and hopefully it's not going to affect their credit rating on their mortgage payments. They're also looking for the credit rating agencies to give. I've advocated for that. Credit rating agencies shouldn't be able to put negative information on anyone's credit report right now. I'd like to see actual legislation enacted to that point, but there are steps that are being taken to prevent the credit rating agencies from using any negative credit information on anyone's credit report right now, because we all need a break, and that would help a lot, and would take the pressure off, for example, landlords, if they knew that they weren't going to have a negative report because they missed a mortgage payment because the tenant wasn't able to pay their rent. It would take pressure off everybody and give some breathing room in the system for everyone. So I know these are challenging times. I think we all, especially people in positions of power like judges and such, need to have patience and hopefully show some restraint and act as mediators to see, okay, what can we do to work through this together, as opposed to being punitive.
Okay, so we have two more questions, two more really quick questions for you before you have to head out. So, Ten, do you want to ask those questions?
Yeah. I'm gonna, I don't know if you'd prefer me ask them one at a time or ask them both and you can just answer.
Yeah, one at a time is good.
I just didn't want, because I know we're stumped for time. But the first question is the new food stamps rule. The new food stamps rules are really going to hurt our youth who often depend on them when they age out. I feel like this was a really poor policy choice. Is there any efforts being made to combat it?
So we did increase support for SNAP benefits in both the CARES Act as well as the HEROES Act that we just passed, and that it increases support for food stamps, for SNAP benefits by about 15%, as I recall. And we want to, obviously, people have been living with food insecurity just under normal circumstances. This is particularly exacerbating the problem. So right away, in addition to the direct payments to individuals, we increased support for food stamps right now. And so it will continue to do everything we can to pay attention to that program, make sure that we continue to provide additional resources. I hope that everyone, by the way, has received their stimulus check already, the $1,200 payment. If you haven't and you have any questions, you can certainly contact my office and we can walk you through the process of tracking down where your stimulus check is. You want to go on to irs.gov. That's the easiest way, and you can put in your information, and it'll give you a ballpark idea of where you are in the process if you haven't received that already. But if you're still having trouble, you can call my office.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder to those listening in, we'll be taking questions even after the panel, even after the congressman steps out. We're going to be asking the panelists questions up until 12:30. So if you want to stick around. But the next question for the congressman is, what legislation can we help advocate for to increase access to housing for young adults?
Yeah, so I absolutely encourage you to be involved with advocating for more resources, both at the state and the federal level, for housing support. But we want to see the HEROES Act adopted, and I'm going to be continuing to push hard for that. We need to press the Senate to enact that legislation, but also if you can get behind and support the HR 6766, which is going to provide more support for people in the foster care community. That's another important bill. And trying to think offhand. Those are the main ones. The HEROES Act and HR 6766. But the emergency rental assistance is a key component of the HEROES Act. We recognize that we need support in that area, and then also, again, the CARES Act also provided $1.25 billion for tenant-based rental assistance and $1 billion for project-based rental assistance to help public housing agencies maintain normal operations. So that's in the CARES Act that was enacted. So there are resources out there, and again, in addition to the fact that it instituted a moratorium on foreclosures for all federally backed mortgages and evictions for renters in homes covered by a federally backed mortgage. There were also provided $4 billion in emergency solution grants to help prevent outbreaks among people experiencing homelessness and very low-income households. And then another $5 billion for community development block grants for cities and states in this area. So we're pushing these resources to hopefully get out to the right places.
Yeah, definitely. Brenda, we know that you're involved in advocacy efforts for affordable housing and rental assistance. Do you have anything you want to add?
Just wanted to mention we're organizing lots of questions and comments around evictions, obviously, and concerns when court opens up. We're working very closely with legal advocates and other housing advocates through Homes RI to put some plans in place when courts do open to, as the Congressman mentioned, work on a mediation process, provide some rental assistance funds from some of the federal emergency dollars that have come into the state. Homes RI is organizing an advocacy day one day next week, still to be confirmed, but really would love everyone to call and to share their personal stories about how evictions and housing will impact you. We know numbers sadly are going to go up rather than down. Even before COVID, there were 8,000 evictions in Rhode Island per year. That is way too many in my view. So trying to work on solutions is what we need help with.
Thank you so much. So Congressman, we know we only have you for a small amount of time. So you can feel free, to excuse yourself at whatever point you need to.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for putting this event together. I think it's important for us to know we live in a community that cares, that we're all in this together. I hope that I was able to provide some helpful updates on the things that either have been enacted or things that we're working on. But it doesn't end here. We continue these efforts together, and we're going to get through this time together. So keep being safe out there. Remember, this is it's a very serious virus, and just don't take it for granted. Make sure that you're doing all following the advice of public health officials, and social distancing, and the frequent hand washing, and practice good safe practices, and hopefully as the summer months continue, we hope that we see that the virus continue to dissipate and infect fewer and fewer people, and then hopefully we rely on our doctors and our researchers to hopefully find a vaccine in the very near future that's going to keep us all healthy and safe. So in the meantime, I'm honored to be with you, and again, please call in my office as a resource. We've got some great caseworkers in our office that they specialize in cutting through government red tape and trying to connect people with the right resources that they need. So please feel free to call on us at any time. The office number is 732-9400, and we're also available. You can get Congressman Jim Langevin on their web address, and you can contact us by email as well. All right.
Thank you so much. We really appreciated you spending that time with us. I also want to say that I'm personally not taking notes, but I'm sure folks are, and hopefully they'll be typed up, and hopefully we can email those to you so that you can be able to get caught up on the rest of the questions and like the things that other folks are wondering and the resources that other community members are offering, so that you can advocate for those.
Sounds good.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Congressman.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Be safe.
You too.
You as well.
Okay, folks. So on some questions that we got that we've received, and they're kind of similar, so I'm gonna combine them. What can people do to support youth struggling with homelessness? And are there resources for youth who have been in foster care?
Who have not
Yeah.
Who have not been in foster care.
Sorry. Who have not been in foster care.
Really quickly, just his closing and him saying like stay safe, it just made me think of something that some of us can't afford to stay safe. And it was like something I realized when I was speaking with Christina, like we were having a chat the other day, and I was like, I have been lucky enough to, like my primary job was working with kids, and since schools are closed, I have no choice but to stay home. But the reality is that I now have to go out and find a job so I can no longer afford to keep myself safe. That was just a thought that popped into my head. Something that I feel like we didn't address when he was here, but that there are folks who are struggling like with financial struggles, but then there are folks who are working still and putting their families in jeopardy and putting their communities around them in jeopardy just to make just to try and survive during this pandemic. But yeah, we should move on to the other questions.
Real quick, Maddie, since you brought that up and we're on that topic, I wanted to get to a couple, like I was mentioning criminalization. I really wanted to ask some questions around like race and how like that's affecting everything, because just because you're putting like, I think just because there's policies in place that say you have to wear a mask somewhere, but and like otherwise you can't go in or you'll be like criminalized or punished, is not like keeping people safe, as Maddie was saying,
at all.
and it's actually just like
Especially
adding on to like other problems like homelessness, because now again you're getting people like there's like punishments being placed for people who aren't wearing these masks, which is like important, but like I mean like the punishment is important, and we talked a little bit about that, but I would have liked to draw that out a little bit more. But back to the questions about resources, like how we can support youth and homelessness, and and then specifically youth who haven't been involved in foster care. And I personally want to ask Tori that first, because I've been a youth and homelessness. Tori came clutch.
yes, Tori's the GOAT.
So the youth outreach program at House of Hope is tasked with, or honored to, find any young adults who are experiencing homelessness and try to connect them to resources. And when I started this job 3 years ago, there really weren't resources for housing for young adults, whether they were in foster care or not. Now, Foster Forward has come forward and offered a dozen or so rental assistance opportunities for folks on an annual basis, but we don't have those opportunities for people who are not in foster care. We don't have youth-specific emergency housing. We don't have youth-specific permanent housing options. So we only have that little sliver of 1 to 2 year rental assistance for youth who are in foster care if they happen to get one of the dozen or so spots. So that's the landscape right now. And the resources that are offered for anyone experiencing homelessness, sometimes youth can use those resources successfully, but 9 times out of 10 it isn't a good fit because it wasn't created with youth in mind. So there's a big lack of resources, definitely. What people can do to support youth experiencing homelessness, I would say getting informed and becoming a part of different advisory groups. If you've experienced homelessness, like Youth in 10 are on the Youth Advisory Board at this time through Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. And other ways would be figuring out what groups like House of Hope or Foster Forward are trying to specifically make plans to move the needle forward on youth housing supports and get behind the plans that those youth and youth organizations are working towards. Because believe us, we have a lot of dreams, and we're happy for you to co-sign those dreams with us and keep moving forward. Thank you.
This is Brenda. I just wanted to note that Jean from Smith Hill CDC also put in some information about a project that they're working on and developing some housing for homeless young adults. And
Brenda, we're having a little hard time hearing you.
Yep. This is Christina. Brenda, I think you froze. But at the risk of at the risk of repeating what Brenda has said, I just want to pick up Jean Lamb from Smith Hill Community Development Corporation is working on, they're working on a project to provide more housing for folks for young folks. I found her comment, I'll read it verbatim. Smith Hill CDC is in the pre-development stages of a housing development targeted specifically geared for homeless young adults. We're looking to engage interested parties to be part of our development committee. My email is jlamb, JLAMB, @smithhillcdc.org, and I can provide more details on the project. Thank you very much, Jean. And this webinar is going to be recorded, and I'm going to send that recording to everyone, and Jean, I'll include your contact information in that. And I'm turning back off. I just wanted to pick up that thread. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for bringing that up, that question. And just one more thing to think about is that while foster youth are overrepresented in the youth homelessness community, if you look at all youth experiencing homelessness, about 30 to 35% of them are foster youth. So we're leaving out 65 to 70% of the youth experiencing homelessness if we only respond to that population. Thank you.
All right, are we on to the next question, or does anyone else have anything to add? I wonder if y'all can hear my cat in the background.
Yeah, we can hear Moon. Moon cares about housing justice.
No, Moon is in heat. Oh,
that
my God. It's really just crazy, but all right. All right, so
I said sorry about that. I was just I just got called into another call, but I'm back.
okay, busy. Alrighty, so okay. So what are you doing, or what do you suggest be done to help queer and trans youth to access stable housing? I want to throw this to Myra and 10 first, if y'all have any thoughts, and then we can proceed from there.
So I would like to speak back to, I'm like really big on mental, well, no, actually, no, sorry. I am big on mental health, but that's not what I want to bring it back to. I wanted to speak on teaching about the tenant, tenant landlord handbook and all of that, and basically just speaking on how, one, you can't discriminate against anyone for their sexual orientation or their sexual expression or anything like that. So just kind of giving them that knowledge so that they have that safe space, and then bringing it back to mental health, having that support, and making sure that trans and queer and just the LGBTQ community in general feels safe in where they are living and stuff like that, and just constant, like just having that mental support part of it there for them.
Bye, Moon. Bye, Moon, please. So I wanted to add to that point. I was actually doing a Works Wonders program at Foster Forward, and they told us that, like, first they asked us if we've ever filled out your date of birth or on a job application. And it was something that like, I was like, yeah, like duh, right? And they were like, no, actually, because that's how they can discriminate against you based on your age. So similarly with applying to housing and everything, just like questions about race and ethnicity, age, and certain things like that are just really easy ways to figure out how, like, what information you're allowed to tell them, and what information you know, you don't have to tell them. Ten, did you have anything else to say on this question?
Yeah, definitely. So what we can do to support queer, wait, sorry, I'm just rereading the question to make sure I'm asking it. I mean, I'm answering it right. What are we doing to help queer or what can be done to help queer and trans youth access stable housing? So we recognize that a lot of queer and trans youth are getting kicked out, and that's like a mental health thing, because you're getting parents who are kicking their youth out, and they're not, you know, processing what's going on in their head. And it's a, you know, it's a systemic thing, because we aren't, you know, coming up with like, you know, that I know of, there aren't any like queer youth like homeless shelters in Rhode Island. So queer youth a lot of times are left to like find their own way to navigate the system. So I think like investing in resources and like supporting resources like Home to Hope, where like folks are really connecting with queer and trans youth is important, and making sure we're going into spaces where queer and trans youth will you know, can be. And also so like as part of my work with Prism, we are, you know, looking into an emergency housing initiative, and we were trying to think of ways to combat like situations as they come up. So we understand that with queer and trans housing situations, it's not always like you know, you're gonna get kicked out in 3 months and you know this, and you can have the time to really like figure yourself out. From experience, it's more like you know, something has gotten toxic, or something has gotten abusive, or something has, you know, escalated to the point where now you're outside, you're sleeping outside because you have nowhere else to go, or you're like couch surfing. So with the initiative with Prism, we're really trying to support those people who are supporting their community, support those people who are like opening up their couches to make sure that they can, you know, continue to do that, and that that's sustainable for them.
I think, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, and I was just gonna also say with like, you know, with like the more education, I think like baseline, like when you're like informing folks about like queer things, and like just like bringing queer up, like educating people, there's hopefully we'll have like less like discrimination and like hate in general, because it's definitely like a discriminatory thing.
I was gonna say something. Moon is really distracting me. I'm sure I'll remember it, but I want to take the time to try to jump to Stephanie. We haven't heard from you much, so if you just want to, you know, give your input on something. Hello?
Sorry, hey. Sorry. Can you hear me? Hi. Sorry, I've just been listening, and honestly, like between 10, Myra, and Maddie, you all are covering all of the points. And I'm definitely an advocate of youth voice, and so I definitely will sit in the background and listen to youth, because they know their life, and like, I don't know, you all have been really covering it. A couple of things that I thought of, like as you all talk about in terms of like barriers, like I know Maddie was saying like there's all the barriers that we are aware of, but I think transportation is obviously a big one as well. Like when we're talking about where to find housing, like if you can't get to that housing, or if you can't get to your job from housing, that's hard. Ways to help out like youth. I know with Youth in Action, we work a lot around youth voice, but we don't do a lot of this direct work on like issues that they're dealing with. We just look for other resources. And so I would love to know like what are all the resources that are out there and how can we make sure that our youth are getting all those resources. And we're a small staff, there's only 3 of us, but we are always willing to go above and beyond for any of our youth and anything that they need. So yeah, so like I said, I've been really just listening and like just taking in all of this information, and I really just happy to be here and hearing from the youth and from their experiences.
Thank you, girl. All right.
Maddie, I have something too, if you don't mind.
No, of course not.
Just some different perspectives of ideas that could also help with housing is if Brenda raised that Housing Works has identified that the minimum wage would have to be $20.86 for someone to identify rent in Rhode Island, then raising the minimum wage would certainly be something that should be done to help queer and trans youth get access to housing. And then I'm noticing that for youth who are in school still, if they are at risk of running away or getting kicked out, they don't have their schools don't have enough funding and resources to have the support staff be that first intervention point to be able to mediate or connect to resources. So supporting our schools more in having the that intervention early on would be much more helpful than the youth then dropping out a year later and trying to make it on their own. So the earlier prevention work is helpful. And to that point, for minors in Rhode Island, DCYF is our only homelessness response option. And we found that in other states that having an option outside of DCYF for emergency shelter when the crisis occurs can be much more accessible and less intimidating. So having a agreement between DCYF and the traditional homelessness services system to make a specific alternative emergency housing option for minor youth is considered a best practice and something that I would love to see in Rhode Island.
Alrighty. Unless anyone else has anything to say, I think we can move on to the next question. All right.
The next question is, and I want to specifically, I want to direct this one at Stephanie and Myra, and then other folks can trickle in. How can teachers best support youth who are homeless or in unsafe living spaces? And I think I want to extend this past teachers and anyone really working closely with youth.
I just really quick, what popped into my head was, if y'all could hear me, right? Okay. So I think that first, teachers need to learn how to work with queer and trans youth, and especially queer and trans youth who are experiencing mental instabilities. Because again, from my personal experience, I thought I could trust the folks at school, and then they told me that I couldn't graduate unless I was evaluated at Butler. So I feel like the approach that they take doesn't feel genuine. It just feels like, oh, this student is suicidal. We don't want her to kill herself in classical, so let's, throw her in Butler. Also, just the way that teachers are not well versed in pronouns, and they just aren't, So I think that teachers and just anyone who genuinely wants to try and make a difference in someone who's struggling, I just think that you need to learn, just take the time and maybe listen to what they're going through. It's a very big thing for adults to try and tell you what you're feeling, or try and tell you what's going on with you. And I'm like, no, if I feel this way, then I should be able to express myself without someone, you know, trying to tell me that this is not really how I feel or this is not really what I'm experiencing. So I think, yeah, just more knowledge would definitely would help. And if like Myra, you wanted to jump in, or attend.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the more knowledge aspect. I feel like in general, there's so like I feel like there's a lot of youth homelessness, and also speaking to the fact that you can't always notice because there's not a this is what a homeless youth person or person looks like. But if they can just be more aware and present, and if they have that background knowledge on basically like what's going on in a kid's life and being more involved, I feel like, and definitely being genuine is a huge aspect in it. I feel like if it's not coming from a genuine place, then it's just not gonna work out. I feel like teachers themselves don't always have the supports to like, you know, do things in a tangible way, if I could put it that way. But trying to like offer mental support where necessary. And yeah, because sometimes like all a youth needs is for someone to just be that guiding light, or even for someone to just believe in them. So just being genuine as a person, even though that's not something that we can really implement, unfortunately, but just yeah. And then also just like as mentioned earlier, providing more supports for teachers themselves, and actually, you know, having the amount of teachers necessary and stuff like that.
Jumping off of that point, not only should we have like more teachers, but more teachers of color, like more teachers that look like me, because in high school I wasn't too keen on completely ripping about how I just had to work both of my jobs, and I wasn't able to finish my homework assignment. I'm not comfortable telling that to my white man teacher who lives on the east side and does not know anything about living in the hood. Like, so just not only do teachers that represent the students that they're teaching, but just more teachers that are aware of what does go on in these communities, but also not like, I don't know, because that is kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, yeah, there are some things that go on in my community, but not everything is bad, you know, or not all of these communities are the same. So I don't know, that was just the point that I wanted to make about more teachers that diversified, and also support for these diverse teachers, because I know that there have been instances of Black teachers and teachers of color legitimately being pushed out because of the lack of support. And yeah, if anyone else wanted to add, I know I would like Steph's input on this.
Yeah, again, Maddie and Myra have said everything. I just want to just emphasize a couple of the points that they made. Were a few weeks back, we had a youth platform meeting with our school's PBD with a few youth across Providence, and they said a lot of the points that Maddie and Myra just stated, of just not feeling heard and understood by their teachers. And just wanting their teachers to see them as human beings, which is really like hard to hear as an adult, of like what is going on in our schools that our kids just want to be seen as human beings when they go into the classroom and when they go into the school. And another point made was creating curriculum and creating environments that's keeping different people in mind. So not creating a structure where you're only trying to teach that student that's really good and that comes to school every day and that's focused, but you're really trying to create an environment where it's the youth who is also struggling, or the youth who maybe had to work a job that night before to help with the family, or maybe just doesn't like to be in school, because I didn't like being in school and like I wasn't really engaged. So it's across the board. And so they really want, at the end of the day, to just be seen as people with lives,
different learning styles.
Yeah, when they come to school. And then also just want to emphasize the point too that that you two were making about having teachers of color and having teachers who are culturally responsive. So they're not just coming to school, because even as teachers of colors, they might have different experiences as well. And so we still want teachers who are culturally responsive and are doing and that are teaching culturally responsibly and to the students and to the environments that they work in, and really understanding the students that they work with. It's really important that teachers are seeing students as whole people and are able to teach to them. And at the end of the day, like, teachers, they need this training and they need the support as well, because they need to come as whole people as well for when they're teaching their students.
Undoing racism for all PVD alum, for all PVD administrators.
Yep.
Yes. Say it one more time for the people in the back. Undoing racism.
Undoing racism for everyone in the Providence School District, even the students, because it's amazing that you have students of color who just internalize so much of the racial oppression around them and these things. And I'm like, no, you are so much better than that. But y'all, we are wrapping it up. This was a nice juicy hour. Yeah, I definitely want to let y'all ask any questions of us before we close out. I'm sad there was one question I really wanted some input on, but this just means that we need to link up a little more, guys. Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everyone who listened. And I'm gonna throw it to Christina to close us out.
Hey everyone, so I'll keep this very, very brief, but I wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you so much to Maddie and Ten for amazing facilitating, and also going back and forth between facilitating and being a panelist. Y'all absolutely rocked it. Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone, for being on. Huge thank you for Congressman Langevin. But what I want to say is, we need action to happen right now. I think one of the things that has come up on this call a lot, and I know is on everyone's mind, is what to do when the eviction moratorium lifts on June 1st. We need action. We need support from our government for folks to help them stay in their homes. We need people to be able to keep their housing. So one way that you can get involved is make your voice heard. The governor is controlling a lot of policy when it comes to the state's response to COVID, and housing is one of the biggest needs. Call her, share your story. Her number is 401-222-2080. Again, that's 401-222-2080. But don't worry, I'm going to include this in the email to everyone who attended. I'm going to include this information, recording of the webinar, how you can get in touch with Congressman Langevin, and how we can get in touch with all of our amazing panelists so we can keep this conversation going. So to really bring this on home, Maddie and Ten, handing it back to you. But again, thank you so much. This was a great town hall, and I'm really proud to be a part of this.
Your time to listen to youth voices. I felt really heard and centered in this conversation, which is nice. I hope that you're able to, really think about how you and your organization can follow through on some of these action plans and how you can support some of the initiatives going on.
Yes, thank you to everyone for being a part of this. Like Christina said, let's continue this and get involved wherever you can, wherever your capacity allows you to. Youth and young adults around, we all need your help. And one day we will live in a world better. But yeah, everyone be well, be safe, and have a great rest of your day. If there's no questions,
How do I even hang
then
up? I'm not joking.
is it only me and you? LOL, is it only me and you, Ten?
I don't know. Don't say no reckless things. This is like online.